So, Simon, it's great to have you. Really excited about your talk and for joining us from, I believe you're in Europe right now, right?
I am. I'm in Manchester, UK.
Awesome. Well, we're really excited to have you and super excited about this talk, security scanning using OWASP ZAP. Looking forward to your discussion, and I will let you know when you have 5 minutes left. So please feel free to get started when you're ready. Oh, wait, hold on one second. Your slides are not showing. There we go. You're bouncing back and forth between slides and not slides.
Okay, that's interesting. So I'm not changing anything. So this could be a challenging talk for people watching anyway. Hopefully they'll keep up.
Hang on one second. Let's just test one more before we start. All right, there we go. We got it.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll get started then. Hope the slides keep up with me. So, hi folks, my name is Simon Bennett. I'm here to talk about security scanning using OWASP ZAP in a CI pipeline. I'm the OWASP ZAP project lead.
Simon,
Yep.
your slides are not showing, sorry.
Okay, right, I will try sharing again because...
Yeah, try sharing your full screen because that seems to be working for folks.
That was what I was doing. So let's...
Yeah, your Google Hangouts is coming in front of the slides.
Yep, that's because I'm having to switch to that. So that... Do we have them now?
I see your slides on Hangouts. Just a moment while we see if it catches up. There we are.
Okay, well, let's hope they keep going. Right, I will carry on. So I work for the Mozilla Cloud Security team, and we use OWASP ZAP quite a lot for automated scanning. So the plan is I'm going to very quickly go through who this talk is for, the problems we're trying to solve, what you can get out of this. Then I'm going to give a quick introduction to ZAP for people who don't know about it, and then get on to the meat of the talk. So this is really talk for anyone who's involved in automation. That could be developers, functional testers, operations staff, security. I'm trying to cast the net fairly widely here. And what we're trying to solve is we want to find security issues as early as possible. We know that with any sort of bugs, the earlier you find them, the better. But that's especially true for security vulnerabilities. And it's often the case that either security isn't considered during the development lifecycle, or it's considered right at the end. So you get the pen testers coming in a couple of weeks before you're supposed to go live. They find a load of problems, and then you have to choose between either delaying the go live date or going live with known vulnerabilities, neither of which is ideal. So what we want to do is we want to test as early as possible and as frequently as possible. So we want to integrate the security testing into the DevOps pipeline. We want it to be something that developers and operations staff are involved in and not just a separate security system. And we want to find the vulnerabilities as quickly as we can so that we can fix them and we can fix the causes from them. Causes of them, whether it's problems with libraries being used, techniques being used, lack of training, whatever that is. Things we're not trying to solve is we're not expecting to find all possible vulnerabilities with automated security scanning. We know that automated scanners are very good at finding particular types of problems, whether cross-site scripting or SQL injection, but they can't find logical vulnerabilities. So the pen testers will always have a job, but hopefully they'll just get to look at the more interesting things rather than the boring ones, which we can find with automation. So I'm going to give you a very quick way to evaluate your applications and then talk about options for more thorough scanning, and hopefully I'll have time to delve into the ZAP API at the end. So an introduction to ZAP for people who aren't very familiar with it. It is a tool for finding vulnerabilities in web applications. It is completely free and open source, and that's very important to us, so there's no pro version, there never will be. It is an OWASP flagship project, and that means it's one of the most mature OWASP projects and one of the ones which is strongly recommended for people to get started with. It is ideal for beginners. So actually, I was a developer and I started ZAP as a way to learn about security. And so the whole training aspect is very important to us. We want ZAP to be a great tool for people learning about security. It's also got lots of advanced features which are used by security professionals. And it is ideal for automated security tests, which obviously I'm talking about today. It's included in all major security distributions like Kali, and there's a site called toolswatch.org which tracks all of the top security tools, and ZAP has been voted the top tool, or top 1 or 2 tools ever since the survey started, I believe. But it's worth stressing that in security there are no silver bullets, and therefore ZAP isn't one of them. Some of the ZAP features, it has what we're now calling desktop mode, so a swing-based UI. This allows you to see what's going on. It's a great way to start using ZAP. But we've also got the daemon mode, which is obviously ideal for automation, and we have a very comprehensive API which allows you to drive ZAP in nearly the same way you can drive the desktop as well. We have a plugin architecture, and what happens is a lot of the ZAP functionality is implemented as add-ons, and that means we can actually update them at any point rather than waiting for one of the full ZAP releases, which happen 3 or 4 times a year. So we have an online marketplace, so we can update add-ons you've already got installed, but there's also lots of add-ons on there which either aren't quite as mature or are a bit more specialized. So if you're interested, have a look at the online marketplace, which you can access via ZAP. All add-ons have a quality level, so they all start at alpha quality and then move up to beta and release. So you get a good idea of how mature the add-ons are. We have both traditional and AJAX spiders. So the traditional spider is a crawler and really effective for navigating web applications very quickly, but it doesn't handle applications that you make heavy use of JavaScript. So if you have an AJAX application, we have an AJAX spider, which is much more effective because that launches a browser, which then goes and clicks through all the elements. That's much better with JavaScript, but it's slower than the traditional spider. We have what we call passive scanning, and that means that anything that's proxied, any traffic that's proxied through ZAP, or which initialized by something like the spider, we passively scan it. We look at the requests and responses, and ZAP can work out potential vulnerabilities just by doing that. And that's completely safe. But we also have active scanning, and that's the attacking. And it's worth stressing that you should only use active scanning on sites that you have permission to test. ZAP is highly configurable. We know that it's very difficult to set ZAP up to be ideal for every possible application because there's so many different configurations out there. So we make ZAP very tunable, although we try and make sure it's possible to, so the defaults are kind of sensible, particularly with scan policies. The scan policies define how the ZAP scanners, both passive and active scan rules work, and those are very, very configurable. It is also highly scriptable, so you can run ZAP with scripts within ZAP, and they have full access to all of the functionality and all the data within them. There are lots of ways you can use ZAP. You can use it as a point and shoot tool. We've got a quick start tab in the UI, which it's effective, but it's very limited. More effective than that is actually proxying your browser through ZAP. That's a great way to do manual testing or to start manual testing because you can explore the application, hopefully do a better job of an automated spider, and then scan the parts you find. But there are lots of tools, parts of ZAP, which are ideal for manual pen testing as well. Obviously, I'm going to talk more about the automated security regression tests, but you can use ZAP as a debugger. I've done that before, where you actually, if you're using a JavaScript library and there's some interaction with your website and something is going wrong, you can put ZAP in between, you can see the traffic that's flowing across, you can change it on the fly as well, so you don't need to change the source code and redeploy to see what happens. But we also try and make sure that ZAP is as easy to integrate as possible with other tools. So a lot of people use it as part of a larger security program, and lots of other tools make use of ZAP. So we've got various options for installing ZAP. We've got installers for Windows, Linux, and Mac. I've already mentioned distributions like Kali, but for automation, I do think that the Docker images are ideal. So we have a stable Docker image, which is the last version of the most recent full version of ZAP, which is 2.5.0. But we also have weekly releases, and the weekly Docker image tracks those, and they are actually pretty stable. So we use them in Mozilla, and we do that for 2 reasons. One, so that I can get changes deployed very quickly. The other reason is if anything goes wrong, then I'm one of the first people to find out. And if the weekly release ever does break, which has happened a couple of times in the last 2 years, I think, then we push out new versions. So the weekly release is actually quite a good one for automation. So what I want to do is now talk about how you can get started with scanning your applications with ZAP. And a really great place to start is what we call the baseline scan. So this is completely safe, so you can run it against live applications, and it runs very quickly, so maximum 1 or 2 minutes. This means it's really great for integrating into continuous integration or continuous delivery, because one of the problems with vulnerability scanning is it often takes a long time. Baseline scan is very quick. It is a bit superficial, but it's to get started, all you need to do is pull the relevant Docker image. In this case, I've got the weekly one there, and then to run it, passing in the target application, target URL. So it's very quick to use and very quick to get started, but it's also very configurable if you need to. So it uses Docker. That is the only dependency. You don't need to install Java or anything like that because it's included in the Docker image. And what it does a time-limited SPIDE of the target. Now, the default is 1 minute, but you can change that to be longer if you want. And after 1 minute, then ZAP just does the passive scanning of all of the URLs that the spider finds. So this means that's why it's safe. We're not doing any attacking. And by default, the baseline scan will just warn if it finds any issues. And if there are no issues, it will return with 0. If it warns or fails, it will return with different values. And it's very easy to change those warnings, to ignore them, or to change them to failures. You can include any ZAP command line option, which is very useful, as we'll see later. And you can also ignore URLs based on regex patterns for any rule or all rules. So the baseline scan includes all of the release and beta passive scan rules. So it will find things like missing or incorrect security headers, problems with cookies, missing CSRF tokens, error disclosure, things like that. But you can optionally include the alpha passive scan rules as well. Here's an example of the usage. Now that's for the weekly release rather than the stable one, because the stable one's got less options, because we've been improving this. And one of the things I'll point out at the bottom is the -Z option. So you can pass any ZAP command line option, which is great because you can pretty much set any option within ZAP using that mechanism. And as you see, you can export reports in HTML, Markdown, or XML format. If you run ZAP, the baseline against a site like example.com, then it will tell you how many URLs it finds, and then give you a list of all the tests that pass, followed by a list of all the ones that warn or fail. In this case, I've cut that down, but you'll see that there are various rules that have failed, and as well, in this case, warn, because that's the default. So you get a summary at the end as well. What you can do is we have an option to generate a configuration file. So use the -G and specify a file name, and then you will get a file which, to start with, looks like this. So it gives you the rule identifier, the name, and the default action, which here is warn. You can just change that with a text editor to be either ignore or fail. And once you do that, then you can rerun the baseline scan. You can pass the file name in using the -C parameter, or you can use -U for URL if you want to store this file online somewhere. So what that'll do is that will give you a very quick overview of the status of the security status of your application. So it doesn't do any attacking, so it's very safe, but it will give you an idea of what it's like. But that is only one individual application, which is great if you've got it, maybe if you're promoting an application from development to staging or from staging to live, it'd be a good time to scan them. But it doesn't actually give you an overall picture. So what we've got is what we're calling the mass baseline scan, and these are a separate set of scripts which wrap time. So we actually use this in Mozilla, and we have more than 70 sites, and we run that every morning very early on. So that's really great because it gives you this overall picture, and it's if you've got lots.
You kind of dropped for a minute. Can you pick back up your slides? We're seeing you instead of your slides.
Right, I've done nothing at all, so I will try and share again. So I've shared now. Have they come back yet?
Yep, we can see your slides now.
Great. So that's the baseline scan and the mass baseline scan. So I said go to the community scripts repo and have a look at the wiki and play around with that. So that's a great way to get an overview of all of your applications, but it is just doing passive scanning, so we're not doing any realistic attacks really. To get a more deep understanding of your applications and the security vulnerabilities in them, what we really want to do is full scans. Now we have various options for this. We have some package options such as the command line quick scan, which I'll mention very briefly, the Jenkins plugin, some Sdlc integration scripts, but then I want to talk about the daemon mode and the API because that gives you a lot of control. And we also have something in development called ZAP as a service, but nothing's available yet, but stay tuned for more announcements about that. So you can run ZAP from the command line using the -command option. It will do a spider, not time limited by default, and will run the active scanner, and then by default it will output the results to stood out. You can change that to write to a file, whether it's HTML or XML, but it's not particularly configurable, so I'll pass on. That's an option, but maybe not the best one. There is a Jenkins plugin which is available, and that was developed by a third party, and unfortunately it's no longer maintained and doesn't work particularly well with the latest versions of ZAP. But we have some good news. So there is a new Jenkins plugin on the way. We were hoping to get it released by now, by today, but it's not quite ready. So there's just been a few problems getting it live. So hopefully, I think maybe very early next week it will be available. So this is a fork and rewrite of the old plugin, and it is being developed and maintained by the ZAP core team. So we have a new member who is doing that, which is really great news. And it supports authentication, scan policies, and even Jira integration. So you've got the URL then, and we will be blogging about this on the ZAP blog. At the moment, it works best with the weekly releases, but we will be releasing ZAP 2.6.0 in the not too distant future, and then that will be the best option to run it with. So this is something we're really excited about, and this is going to be something we strongly recommend. So if you do use Jenkins, this will be a really great option for you. We do also have the Sdlc integration scripts, which are very kindly contributed by another company, and they are also on the community scripts repo as well. And they also support spidering, passive scanning, and active scanning. Again, support authentication and Jira integration. So these are another great option, whether you use Jenkins or whether you don't. So this is another really good possibility. What I want to do is I want to talk a bit more about the API, but before I do that, it's worth mentioning some of the command line options because these can be applied to ZAP in any of those environments. So it doesn't matter whether you're kicking off ZAP via the Docker images, via the Jenkins plugin or the Sdlc integration scripts. But there's some command line options that we think are pretty useful in automation. ZAP stores everything it does in a database, and if you have problems with your computer, if your laptop crashes, or even if ZAP crashes, that shouldn't matter because everything's in a database and there's a recovery log, so you can get back to where you were before. In automation, this isn't quite so useful. If something goes wrong, you're better off fixing the underlying problems and running it again. So we actually recommend turning the recovery log off via that config parameter. And one of the advantages of that is actually speeds things up, and speed is always key when it comes to automation. I also recommend that you update all of the add-ons using the option there. And one of the reasons for doing that is all of the active and passive scan rules are actually included in add-ons. Even if you don't install any add-ons yourself, they'll be included by default in ZAP in that way. And what that means is you can actually scan your application with ZAP 1 week, and the very next week scan it again. Even without changing the application, ZAP might find some new vulnerabilities. And it can do that because we might have updated the scan rules to include new scan rules or improve the existing ones. But you only get that if you update the add-ons. So there's the command line option to do that. You can also install non-default add-ons as well. This is particularly good if you're using Docker, because you can just pass that option. Maybe you want to install the DOM XSS scan rule, which we don't include by default. When ZAP launches the first time, it will actually create an API key for security purposes. This is fine when you're using the ZAP UI, because you can go into the UI and see what the API key has been set to, but it's not so good if you're using automation. So you've got two options here. You can specify the API key from the command line as specified there, or you can disable the API key, but you should only really do that in a safe environment. So I'll get on to using the ZAP API now. And what I want to do is give an introduction, talk about exploring, scanning, reporting, before probably very quickly touching on authenticating and tuning. So the API, we have a REST-ish API. It actually only uses GET requests, but this is actually very useful because we have a web-based UI, and you can try things out. You can copy those GET requests, you can paste them into curl or any other tool you like, and just reproduce the operations very quickly. It does map very closely to the UI into the code. So the better you understand the ZAP UI, the easier you will find it to use the API. Even if you don't plan on using the UI, it's worth starting with it. So there's a very basic, but it is a complete web UI. So it's a great way to explore the API. And we have clients in various languages as detailed there. And the clients and the web UI are all generated from the code, so they should all be complete. So to use the API UI, point your browser at the host and port that ZAP is listening on. Then what you'll see is there'll be one of the first links will be to the API. And top level, as you can see on the left, will be a list of all the components that support the API. And this can actually change. So if you install new add-ons, they can provide new API actions, operations as well. Once you click on component, you'll be given a list of all the views, actions, and others that component supports in the API. Views just return information, actions change things, and other operations return data in different formats, and that will depend on what the particular operation is. So as I've mentioned already, the best thing is to play around with the desktop UI before using the API. And if you need to do any complex configurations, then say changing context, setting up authentication or scan policies, then the way I always do it is configure them in the UI. Then we export those in text files, and then you can import them again via the API. And that's much easier than setting everything up individually via the API. You can you can reproduce the operations you want to perform via the API UI, and finally convert whatever you want to do to a script. So I'm just going to show the Python API in the examples rather than any others. All the other ones will follow the same kind of format. So you can use pip install to get the Python API, and from your script you just need to import from ZAP v2. Then you have two options for initializing the ZAP v2 object. The first one will use localhost with port 8080. So if you're listening on a different host or port, you will need to use the second option where you can specify what those will be. And as you can see, you can then open individual URLs which will be proxied through ZAP. When you do automated testing, how effective the scanning is often comes down to how effective you can explore the application. So the better you explore the application, the better your automated scanning will be. One of the best options, I think, is proxying regression or unit tests. If you have effective unit tests which use a browser, then or use any sort of web communication, then proxy those through ZAP. If they're effective tests, then you will very thoroughly explore your application. If you don't have those or they're not complete, then use a traditional spider or the Ajax spider if your application uses a lot of JavaScript. We do have options like importing SOAP definitions and mod security v2 logs as well.
Simon, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Here's, you can see the dialog for the spider from the UI and the API there, and you see the options are very similar. And what will happen is when you kick off the spider, you'll actually get a scan ID, which you can then pass into the API, and that will tell you the status. And the status is the percentage how far through the spider's got. So if we look at the scripts there, you'll see that we kick off the spider, we're passing the target to the scan, then we loop around waiting until the status gets to 100%. The Ajax spider is subtly different because it doesn't return a percentage. We don't know how far it's got, so instead it returns a status of running, and when it doesn't do that, then you know it's completed. Passive scanning happens automatically in the background thread, and most of the time will keep up with any proxying you're doing. However, if you spider a particularly large site, then it might take a little while to catch up. So we do recommend, once you finish spidering a large app, to poll the pscan records to scan, so you can wait until that gets down to 0. But if you then visit any new URLs, then that records to scan will go up again. Active scanning is very similar to the spidering. So you kick off the active scan and then poll the status and wait until it gets to 100%. You can report via HTML or XML, but you can also get hold of all of the alerts as well. If you've got a particularly large site, you might have a lot of alerts, so we recommend actually paging through them, which the API supports as well. And then you can do whatever you like with those alerts. And you can also shut ZAP down via the API as well. Authenticating is one of those things that is non-trivial. Form-based we can definitely cope with, but we have authentication scripts which should be able to have anything that you like. But I have found that if you've got complex single sign-on systems, you might actually find it better to have separate options in your test environment. That's one of the things we do in Mozilla, which makes things a lot easier. And I definitely recommend using the UI to set authentication up and then exporting the configurations to use those via the API. Getting a bit low on time, so I'll go through these very quickly. We've got lots of options for tuning ZAP, whether it's cutting down how long the spider takes or tuning the active scan rules. And we provide a lot of feedback as well. So you can get feedback on how the scans are doing, the response statistics, and there's a new alpha add-on which will tell you exactly what's going on with authentication as well. So you can see how many of the requests have been successfully authenticated, how many have the logged in indicators and logged out indicators. So you can actually get a very good indication of how effective you are scanning when using authentication. And we do have StatsD support as well. And we've got quite a lot of options for accuracy as well. So every attack rule, we can change the threshold. And after 2.5.0, we have options where you can configure individual rules. So you can specify which forms don't need CSRF tokens, and you can change things like the amount of time used for timing attacks. And again, these are all ZAP configuration options, so we can pass them in via the -config option, which means they will work with a baseline scan as well. And I want to stress that we have lots of documentation. We can never have enough documentation, but there's a getting started guide and a user guide that's included with ZAP and available online as well. We have ZAP user group, a ZAP developer group, we have a wiki with lots of links to the videos as well. And we also have an IRC channel on Mozilla, irc.mozilla.com, #websec tools, where all of the ZAP core team tend to hang out. So please join that and ask us questions. And links to all of the other things are available on ZAP and online as well. And so I've shown you the baseline scan, which will give you a very quick overview of each individual application. We've got a mass baseline, which will allow you to create a dashboard to give you that summary of the status of your applications, just based on passive scanning. We have a new Jenkins plugin which is coming, which will allow you to scan, you do full ZAP scans with a lot of configuration, make it very easy. But we also have the ZAP API, which gives you as much control as you have via the UI. And if you need any help, then please just ask. And that's the finish of my talk. And so I'd just like to thank the companies who made this event possible. And that's it. And I believe there is now a Slack channel where you can ask questions.
Yeah, it'd be great for you to join. It was an awesome talk. Super excited about ZAP and some of the new improvements. Great to know that we can kick it off via the CI/CD pipeline pretty easily. and looking forward to what you guys improve upon as you learn from the CI/CD implementations. So if you want to talk to Simon, feel free to join us in the Slack channel for live interaction and Q&A. And we'll be taking a 10-minute break. We're going to come back and hear about multi-security checkpoints on a DevOps platform from Hassan Yusar.